Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Yeah, so it's a pleasure to have Professor Amarjit Singh with us today. Amarjit is a professor at IIIT Delhi, where he has been for about 6 or 7 years, maybe, or longer?
6 years now.
6 years. But he's also been on leave for the past couple of years, doing a company called Zenetics.
Yes.
That's looking at very interesting energy analytics using sensors. So Amarjit got his PhD from UCLA, where he worked on a large project that was working on sensors and things like that before IoT became a buzzword. And now he's looking at how to make money from IoT. So he will tell us about both the research as well as the
impact is more important, I would
the
say.
commercialization. So welcome.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thanks Venkat for the nice introduction. Just to link it back to the previous presentation, there is a lot of articles on internet around how much energy goes into the food, right? Vegetarian food versus the non-vegetarian food, and how vegetarian food is very less energy intensive versus the non-vegetarian food and all that. So we are not talking about that indirect energy impact of what we eat, but in this talk I'll talk about the direct energy impact of what we do, specifically in the residential segment. So in our homes, how we consume energy and how we can relate back to savings, which if at us, even though are very small at the home level, would scale very well because there are millions and billions of homes across the world, right? So 1% saving can scale up very quickly for large number of homes. So the talk is about achieving this household energy breakdown. Actually, the end objective is achieving household energy efficiency at scale. It's a joint work with Kamin at University of Virginia, Nipun, who is a PhD student who is jointly co-advised by Kamin and me. Nipun is sitting in the back. So things that I can't answer for whatever you are asking me, he is the right person. And being an advisor, that's the luxury you get when you move from a student to an advisor, that someone else does the work and you present, right? And you take the credit. So not taking the entire credit, much of the work has been done by him. I'm just presenting what he has been doing. So just to set the context right, there is a lot of buzz around environment and sustainability, and here's a small video from National Geographic that talks about it to set the tone right for the talk.
For 2.5 million years, the Earth's climate has fluctuated, cycling from ice ages to warmer periods. But in the last century, the planet's temperature has risen unusually fast, about 1.2 to 1.4 degrees Fahrenheit. Scientists believe it's human activity that's driving the temperatures up, a process known as global warming. Ever since the Industrial Revolution began, factories, power plants, and eventually cars have burned fossil fuels such as oil and coal, releasing huge amounts of carbon dioxide and other gases into the atmosphere. These greenhouse gases trap heat near the Earth through a naturally occurring process called the greenhouse effect. The greenhouse effect begins with the sun and the energy it radiates to the Earth. The Earth and the atmosphere absorb some of this energy, while the rest is radiated back into space. Naturally occurring gases in the atmosphere trap some of this energy and reflect it back, warming the Earth. Scientists now believe that the greenhouse effect is being intensified by the extra greenhouse gases that humans have released. Evidence for global warming includes a recent string of very warm years. Scientists report that 1998 was the warmest year in measured history, with 2005 coming in second. Meanwhile, readings taken from ice cores show that the greenhouse gases carbon dioxide and methane have hit their highest levels in the past 420,000 years. Arctic sea ice is also shrinking. According to NASA studies, the extent of Arctic sea ice has declined about 10% in the last 30 years. As long as industrialized nations consume energy and developing countries increase their fossil fuel consumption, the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere will continue to rise. Researchers predict that temperatures will increase about 2 to 10 degrees Fahrenheit by the end of the century. What's less certain is what rising temperatures mean for the planet. Some climate models predict subtle changes. Others forecast rising sea levels which could flood coastal areas around the world. Weather patterns could change, making hurricanes more frequent. Severe droughts could become more common in warm areas, and species unable to adapt to the changing conditions would face extinction. Although much remains to be learned about global warming, many organizations advocate cutting greenhouse gas emissions to reduce the impact of global warming. Consumers can help by saving energy around the house, switching to compact fluorescent light bulbs, and driving fewer miles in the car each week. These simple changes may help keep the Earth cooler in the future.
Yeah, so just preparing ourselves for the doomsday and what can we really do. So if I just take one quick summary out of the whole video, these numbers essentially show that summary, that over the last 2 decades, the population has increased by roughly about 30%, but the production has increased by 83%, right, to cater to our increasing needs of energy day by day. I mean, just to look around, just 6 years ago, I used to have one device, one personal device. Now I personally have probably 5 personal devices, and they are consuming energy, right? And in spite of this disproportionate increase in the production, there are 1.5 billion people across the world who don't have access to electricity, right? Just bare minimum stuff that they need to do just to charge their phones and all that stuff. They need to rely on alternate sources. So what is the what is the solution? One thing which we have been doing for last several years and continue to do is to increase the production, right? And I mean, to do it in a way which is more sustainable. So add solar, add wind, add a lot of renewable stuff and replace it with lots of not renewable energy. But in addition to increasing the production side, can we cater to the consumption side also and reduce the consumption? And mind you, here the impact is actually double, specifically in the context of countries like India, where there are line losses, aggregate line losses as they call it, which are combination of theft and technical losses, which stand at roughly about 50%. So which means that if I save if I reduce on consumption of 1 unit of electricity, it's actually equivalent to producing 2 units of electricity. So that there is a scaling factor of 2 that automatically gets applied for the motivation of reducing the consumption as we move forward and work towards a sustainable future. So where exactly to begin? So how can I contribute? If you look at where the energy consumption happens, then buildings are one of the largest consumers of electricity across the world. And I mean, here are some countries, Australia, China, India, roughly anywhere from 20 to 50% is what is of national production, and therefore it scales to the global level also, is consumed within the buildings, right? So if we were to really create an impact, buildings are the environment where we live in, where we spend pretty much 24 hours or most of the time of our day, and therefore it's upon us to do those small things that can contribute towards reduction in the environment, in the building environment we live in, and which can eventually translate to savings or the impact at a very big scale, because that's the big portion you are putting a dent on. So one may argue that, does that mean we start constructing more energy efficient buildings? Yes, of course. I mean, any building that we construct in the future should be energy efficient, and that's where lots of certifications like LEED certification from the US, or in India there are GREHA, and there are bunch of other certifications that come from Terry University and all that stuff. But what do we do with the existing buildings? They say that a majority of the buildings that would exist in 2050, so about 35 years from now, are those that are already built. So can we do something there? So those buildings are built. I cannot replace those buildings, because replacing that building, if we look at the life cycle analysis, because I would use the new material, producing the new material would itself have consumed some energy. So if we look at the energy impact of replacing a building with a more energy efficient building, it will peg us back by roughly about 80 years, right? So replacing every inefficient building with an efficient building is not the solution. Can I make the existing buildings more energy efficient? And of course, along with that, as we build new buildings, we build them in a way which is more energy efficient. So what do we do there? There's a nice experiment Google did where they started color coding all the food that they were giving in their cafeteria, where the healthy food was color coded in green, and the guilty pleasures, sweets, and all that stuff was color coded in red. They wanted to see whether sort of people, I can nudge behavior and change the behavior of the people by this simple color coding scheme, right? Nothing very techy about it, just looking at the behavioral science and seeing how can I really impact the human behavior. And there were benefits. There were 9% reduction in calorie intake from overall candy consumption that happened from the cafeteria, and there were 47% increase in the water intake from before they did the color coding. So let's apply a similar thing to energy. There is a large company in the US called O-Power. So they started with a very interesting idea, and there's a very nice TED talk around O-Power by the founder of O-Power, where he said that they hired a few interns and they made them go to different homes in the neighborhood, right? And what they did was they started putting some cards, the way you have some cards outside your hotel room, and on each of the homes in the neighborhood. And sometimes the card would say you should save energy because 1 unit saved is equivalent to so many kilos of carbon dioxide, and or because it is healthy for your children. So they would compare 1 unit of energy with different aspects, health impact, environment impact, and all that stuff. But none of them really pushed people to reduce their consumption. What eventually pushed was a very simple message that you should save because your neighbor is saving, right? And in Indian context, that works very beautifully, right? I mean, why, if I were to tell you that you are the worst amongst all your neighbors, doesn't matter how rich you are, you would be nudged to say that, what am I doing really? What is that guy next door doing that I am not doing, right? So a very simple behavioral change by just saying that if I compare your energy consumption with neighborhood energy consumption and tell you where you stand, that itself results in roughly about 3% of reduction, right? No, I mean, very simple technically to adopt. I already have the consumption information from billing information. I can compare across neighborhoods. I can make it more relevant by comparing across homes that are similar rather than doing a generalized comparison, and I can give more targeted information, right? So the idea is, but if you look at the global impact, this 3% reduction, let's say if we are able to do at a global scale, we are really talking about 1.5 year of solar production across the whole of United States as of today. So the impact, so roughly about 6 terawatt hours is what we are talking about, or maybe actually 12 terawatt hours is what we are really talking about, this 3% reduction by a very simple intervention comparing your consumption with neighborhood consumption, right? So if we look at the so essentially that's the whole theme of this talk, that what feedback so assuming that so human beings are the species that care the most about the future because their survival depends on it, and they can do something to make sure that their survival is extended by as much period as possible. So can we?
How sustainable is this? How long does this effect last?
Yeah, so there have been studies that show that after an initial thing there is some tapering, but even after tapering it does have an impact roughly of the order of 1 to 2% on the sustainable level as well. So assuming that we are all conscious species, but we don't have the relevant information to take the action that we are supposed to take towards energy savings. The idea is that what sort of feedback can I give you so that I can nudge you towards a more energy efficient behavior than an energy inefficient behavior, right? So there are different types of feedbacks that I can, so this is coming from research over the last 2 decades, that I can give you enhanced billing advice that, I mean, for example, the video talked about changing your lights to CFLs, and eventually these days we talk about LEDs, right? Or we can start giving you estimated feedback, which would work in a way that if I know at the 20th of every month how much my bill would be at end of the month, maybe I am pushed to save a little bit because it is going beyond the budget that I had saved for the energy consumption for that month. I can possibly extend it to daily, weekly feedback, the real-time feedback, real-time plus feedback, and appliance feedback, which is augmented. I mean, to a level where actually recently one of the students working with me, we were looking at how do I combine this phone information with the smart meter energy bill to then say that at any real point which appliance is being in a wasteful activity and because of whom, right? Of course, it may result in all the fights between husbands and wives of the wastage in refrigerator is because of you or because of you. But the idea is to identify the culprit and sort of then the social environment around it, let it work, right? So as we move across the spectrum, the IoT instrumentation increases because to reach out to the appliance feedback level, and a personalized appliance level feedback, I would need to know where every person is. I would need to know when every appliance is turning on and turning off, as well as the analysis also increases because the amount of data increases, the amount of analysis that I'm doing would also increase, right? So overall, the idea is that can I reach out to a disaggregation level? So currently the electricity bill that we get, how many of you have seen your electricity bill? Oh, quite a few. I am surprised. So it says so many units of energy consumed. Price per unit is so much. In India, that price is on a slab basis. 0 to 200 units is so much. 200 to 400 is so much. And then there are a bunch of taxes, and therefore the bill you have to pay is this. Now, if I were to say that use this bill to decide where you want to save, you'll say, yes, I want to save, but I don't know what to do, right? So if that bill is turned into an itemized bill, I mean, compare it to your grocery bill or compare it to, let's say, your phone bill, right? Or the SMS that, so for all the prepaid users, right? The SMS that you get that your last call costed so much and your remaining balance is so much would have at least some impact. Oh, I should not make another outgoing call for next 6 hours, right? Or before I recharge, right? So essentially giving you information that can help you take that decision which otherwise in the absence of that information you would not take. So the idea would be that can I disaggregate that bill to say that this month your AC consumed so much, your refrigerator consumed so much, and so on and so forth, and eventually take it to the next level and say that your refrigerator consumed 100 units while an ideal refrigerator consumption should have been 60 units. Take it to even the next level to say that the extra 40 units are because of, let's say, additional deep freezing or additional cycles that are happening in your freezer and get it serviced. So now I'm telling you exactly what to do, which is the information which is missing as of today. So the idea is, can I reach out to that level of information where I tell you what to do so that assuming that you are, I mean, we are all good people to take actions on the information that is provided, but currently there is that lack of information that is provided to us.
So if the utility is trying to detailed information to allow you to consume less and therefore.
So it's very interesting phenomena. The whole energy game is very interesting. So part of the thing is that the ecosystem pushes them. So for example, in the US, the government mandates every utility to invest, I think, 2% of their revenue into energy saving activities. And in the US, the market is an open market, or in many states at least, it's an open market. So which means that I as a consumer can choose between utility X and utility Y. Now if I have a choice between two utilities, I would go with the utility which engages me more or which gives me better benefits, right? Now, therefore the utility has an incentive to spend that 2% towards these kind of things which act as customer engagement initiatives to get me more customers. On the Indian context side, actually there is that demand and response thing, right? That so in Indian context, the residential energy is actually subsidized at the cost of industrial and commercial energy. So which means that if I can reduce that consumption and transfer it to somewhere else, then I as a utility also gain, right? Because at the end of the day, there is a lot more demand than I can supply, and I have to shed load. So if I can reduce from areas which are less revenue intensive for me to areas where I can gain more revenue, then it's also an incentive for me. And besides, there are other sort of things that work in the overall ecosystem. So yes, there are some incentives. There are certain ecosystem pushes from the government top-down level that also work in the whole thing. And together, there is some incentive for utilities to do that.
Then there's also the fact that, I mean, there's not enough power in Bangalore, for example. They have power cuts. So you would think that would be a very strong incentive to reduce, because in an ideal world, if they could manage the power so they never have to do a power cut, that would make everyone much happier.
So although
that would seem like a strong motivator to me. That's you don't get in the US and you don't get in the
right.
UK.
So although, I mean, the flip side to that is that a lot of power cuts you get are in the area. So now the utilities are becoming smarter and smarter. So for example, the farmer, again relating back to the talk, the farmer actually gets electricity only 2 hours in a day because his electricity is free, right? And anything that is supplied to him is a loss for the utility, right? So utilities are actually becoming very, very smart these days. They are mapping out which are the areas where I get 100% billing return back. And when they have low amount of energy to supply, they would cut off from areas where their collections are lower, right? So in fact this is a very interesting behavioral thing. Because I have power cuts, I am willing to pay extra to put in that battery for the inverter in my home. I am willing to pay extra for the diesel generator backup in my home. Now, if the utility were to come and tell me that, look, I can give you 24/7 guaranteed, but I will charge you extra, my sense is there will be lots of people who are willing to pay that extra price in return to getting a guaranteed 24/7 electricity. But because of the overall regulations in the market, the utility cannot come to one and other customer and say that I will charge you extra, I will charge him less, because then there is that whole social equality and status and all those things come into the picture. So overall, it's a very complex ecosystem. The utilities that are bleeding in India, pretty much every utility is running in losses. Government is running lots of programs, pushing banks to or state governments to take over their losses and all that stuff. So I mean, all the accounting issues and all that stuff. But which forces utilities to look into how they can cut out on their losses while working within the regulations or the legislations that govern the rule of the land. So overall, I mean, energy is a very, very complex ecosystem, specifically in the Indian context, because it is very very regulated thing, and there are a lot of, I mean, very government owned, except for a few utilities in a few states. Pretty much every other utility is government owned, and therefore, I mean, the way they are operated and all those things are very complex. So moving forward, okay.
Coming back to this point about devices, which are the devices that consume the most electricity or energy in a home?
Yes, so there have been studies done, and I think, I mean, if we intuitively look back, so at least in Delhi I know that suddenly when the summer starts, my bill goes from 1500 to 6000 rupees, right, because of air conditioner, right. So largely if I look at my energy, annual energy spent, significant proportion of it, roughly about 40 to 50% goes into air conditioning, right. And I mean, more than a luxury, it is more and more becoming a necessity as our I mean, overall standards of life are improving, and even a middle class, lower middle class person also now owns an air conditioner. Beyond air conditioner, there are loads that run in the background all the time. So refrigerator is one of them, which is running 24/7, and it's very interesting. Refrigerator these days, if I buy a 4-star refrigerator, it would consume less than 1 unit a day. But the old refrigerators, which are let's say 15-20 years old, and that's one device which we never throw out till it stops working, right? But the math shows that throwing out is way more beneficial, and I will recover back the cost in less than 2 years. So that device, because the way technology has improved over the last 2 years, if I have that information, I did it for my own home. And the refrigerator that we had from 80s, late 80s, early 90s, it's bad to run that refrigerator. Rather, I would throw it away for free, buy a new refrigerator, and I will recover back the cost of savings in electricity within 2 years. So the numbers, if those numbers exist, we can just save by these simple actions. But overall, I mean, coming back to it, air conditioning and then the background loads. In the US context, in fact, the background loads constitute roughly about 12% of the total energy consumption. Because in the US, there is no concept of a switch. So the microwave is always on, the TV is always on, everything is running on standby power all the time, 24/7. So that standby power is very small, and the government regulations pushes it to be lower and lower. But that's, I mean, that's really the virus, right? I mean, that's running 24/7, and a simple action of putting a switch and switching it off can actually save United States 10% of its overall electricity consumption.
You know, when you had your graph, what really surprised me was that Indian household consumption was the highest in terms of the. Is that because there's less energy consumption overall in India per capita? Because so houses here tend to use. So yes, there's the middle class. Yes, there's people like you with air conditioning. But there's an awful lot of people who have almost no energy in their house and very low energy, don't have fridges, don't have. So I'm really surprised.
No,
to see it's such a
so
high
no. So that context was for buildings. It was not houses, right? So buildings would be office spaces. Buildings would be other commercial buildings.
Okay.
So it is. So the residential. You are right that the residential consumption in India as a percentage is lower than in the United States. But I'm talking about in buildings in general. This talk is overall about lowering the consumption for homes, and there are things that we can do for the other side also, commercial buildings and all that stuff. But that graph was around buildings.
Okay, that's amazing. Thank
Okay.
you.
Okay.
I don't want to be oppressed, but the reason I asked for devices was, so if you just focus on the fridge, the geyser, and the AC, are you going to hit about 80%?
So, yes, largely about 70. So when many people say that, oh, I have extra lights turned on in my home all the time, right? I mean, look at it. A tube light consumes 40 watts, right? 40 watts, even if it runs 24 hours, is less than 1 unit of electricity. And an AC compressor, when it runs, it consumes 2.5 kilowatts. So that's equivalent to 20 minutes of AC running, right? So, I mean, so you are right that there are some majority of appliances which are roughly about 3, 4, 5, which would constitute roughly about 80% of my bill. And and this intuition is what we also work with, that if I can disaggregate those 4, 5, then I don't need to go to the complex disaggregation of can I tell which room light is on, because that will not give me bang for the buck also. So if I focus on saving in those 4, 5 appliances, and that's where the overall talk will also go and research will go, that how can I do targeted feedback for few of those appliances which matter the most. Yes? Yeah, so I agree. So all I'm saying is that yes, if I look at the overall life cycle analysis, right? So what they call the concept as cradle to grave, right? From the time, so whatever energy it took to prepare the raw materials, whatever energy it took to prepare that device, and then whatever energy it will take to, let's say, recycle that device. So if I take the whole energy for the whole life cycle analysis, which they call as cradle to grave analysis, then maybe the numbers would turn out to be different, that I should probably keep on consuming my, keep on using my old refrigerator, right? But look at it from, I mean, as an individual user, right, you are more interested in your own bill, right, than the overall cradle to grave analysis, which is also a much more complex thing to do, and there would be lots of assumptions which would come into play there. So I'm not saying that is the only solution. In fact, I would say that the solution is to use your appliances in a more efficient manner. I'll talk about our work at the startup in Zenetics in my tomorrow's talk, but the whole philosophy of the startup also is that, I mean, of course it is excellent to have a more energy efficient appliance. Right? A 5-star AC is better than a 2-star AC. But if that 5-star AC is running when there is no one in the room, then it doesn't matter, right? So independent of how efficient or inefficient your appliance is, running it in an efficient manner is very important, right? And that itself will result in savings. So here is a video from a startup in US which came around disaggregation.
Whoa. How did we use that much energy last month?
Hello.
Who are you?
I'm Bidgley, your personal energy advisor the utility company sent me.
How did you get in here?
You downloaded my app. All right. Well, let's see how your energy consumption compares with your neighbors. Yikes.
What do you mean inefficient? We just bought this new refrigerator.
Take it easy, we'll figure this out. Let's see, it looks like your base load is pretty high. You've probably got some big offenders that are pulling power 24/7. Here's a couple of examples.
I thought that you were getting rid of that Xbox.
Yeah, I'm with her. You get rid of this man cave machine, you could reduce your base load by 10%.
Really?
Yeah, and that's just the beginning. Oh, wow. Looks like you guys had a pretty wild weekend, huh?
Wait, here?
Yeah.
No, we were out of town.
Oh, looks like your AC didn't get the memo. Did you forget to turn it off before you left, guys?
That sounds about right.
Well, that made a pretty big dent. It's all good. In the future, I'll send you texts whenever I see a spike like that.
Oh.
I'll even go you one better. With this guy, you can control your thermostat from anywhere.
Bidgley, this is awesome.
Save your praise, my friends. Just getting warmed up. John, you forgot to turn the space heater in your office off. Come on, John. You're better than that. Let's see how you're doing now.
Thanks, Bidgley. We couldn't have done it without you.
I'm just here to help. And it's only going to be more important as your energy needs change with time. You know that electric car you've been wanting?
Bitchley, you shouldn't have.
You're telling me. As much as you save at the pump, you could waste at the plug if you don't know what you're doing. But don't worry. I can be pretty creative when it comes to these kinds of things.
Oh, Bitchley.
You think that's impressive? You should see what I can do with solar. That's what I'm here for. I'm here to make sure your energy goes where it's needed. Give me that.
So it's a startup that came roughly about 4 or 5 years ago, started by few Indian people in Silicon Valley. That's why the name is Bijli. And they couldn't get the domain name BIJLI, so probably the spellings are BIDGELY because of all that .com stuff that you don't get. So essentially, and I mean, just a small anecdote, it sort of, the startup came around the same time when we started working in energy disaggregation. So there was a senior faculty in the US with whom we were collaborating, and he sent out this email to us saying that, look, these guys are claiming that with 15-minute energy data, they can disaggregate. And I'll tell you what we are talking about in terms of disaggregation with very high accuracy. And I'm like, that's not true. That can't be done because the state-of-the-art papers can't do very high accuracy with few seconds of data, right? So of course, I mean, that's just an anecdote to say that there are lots of claims and marketing videos that startups would indulge in, including ours. Not everything is true, but the vision is to sort of reach out there. I mean, so the vision is always there, right? So you always try to do that product market fit. And I mean, which in case of Bijli, the way they did was they also struggled to do it bottom up. So to go to each and every consumer and say what they were saying here, and I will help you save, you adopt Bijli solution. And eventually, a couple of years ago, they pivoted to a top-down model. So they said, they went to utilities and said that, oh, through you, I will go to all your consumers and give them disaggregated energy and sort of you pay me rather than consumers paying you and all that stuff. So when we started on the energy disaggregation stuff way back in 2012, of course, I had just a couple of years ago, I had moved to India, and the overall philosophy in our research group was that let's do things where we get a competitive edge over, let's say, other top quality researchers around the world, right? So the thing was that, can I pick up problems which are technically deep enough, but they may be problems that others will not likely work on because they are not the problems of the context in which they live in, right? So many top US researchers may not work on those problems because they are largely problems in the Indian context or in some other context which doesn't exist in the United States, but they still are technically deep enough, and that will give us leverage also. So we started viewing everything from the Indian lens, that what's the Indianized version of this thing and that thing and all that stuff. And that's where we observed that, okay, when we look at the disaggregation research, which by the way is pretty old, I mean, probably, yeah, so the first paper on energy disaggregation came before India won its first Cricket World Cup also, so way back before 1983. And so it's an active thing. So people always want to look at energy reduction, and disaggregation would have is. So recently, over the last 8-10 years, it has picked up a lot because the data collection is becoming much easier, because a lot more complex analytics can be done much easily. And therefore, it has again picked up after a dull period of 90s and early 2000s. So when we started in 2012, we said that, oh, there is no data set in the Indian context. So let's first do deployment in the Indian context to understand if there is something called Indian context or not, right? So of course, you think of ideas, you push them to your PhD students, and they do the dirty work. So Nipun had to go to his home, deploy all these sensors, listen to the scolding of his mom and dad, and he's, I mean, to an extent that he was on the verge of being thrown out of his home, that what are you doing, right? Are you trying to spy on me or what? So we did appliance level measurement, we did measurement at the circuit level, we did measurement at the overall home level. In addition to energy, we did measurement for the water consumption also. Because I mean, the idea was to understand, in Indian context, again, a lot of energy goes into the water after the water reaches our home. Because we pump the water into the storage tank, then we filter out the water also. So the idea was to understand how much of energy gets embedded into the water we use after it reaches our home. And I mean, the deployment turned out to be quite a challenge, quite a task. Managing all these devices was not very easy thing to do for even a couple of months. But I mean, this is the first and so far one of the most extensive data sets that came out of an Indian residential setting. There were some observations. One of the observations was that a voltage fluctuation in the Indian context versus the US context is a lot more, right? So we saw about 9% spread around the desired voltage level, while if we compared with other data sets that were collected in the US context, there were a lot less voltage fluctuations. Besides voltage fluctuations, we also observed that a lot more power failures. Even the home network connectivity to collect the data, right, was much poorer over here than resulting in data losses and all that stuff. So, I mean, I'm just putting it together for those of you who are looking into IoT, that the context matters. And I mean, in Indian context, these are real challenges, voltage fluctuations. You set up let's say a Zigbee network, or in our case, we also deployed sensors over another home protocol called Z-Wave. And when electricity goes down and gets recovered, depending on the booting time of different devices, the network will not come back up in the same state as it was before the power failure, right? Which will never be a challenge if you deploy in a home in the US context, because they never face power failure, right? So which means that if you were to create a home automation or an IoT system for the Indian context, you have to take into account all of these aspects, right? So for all of you that are aspiring to sort of do a startup in the home automation things, these are things that you should incorporate as you build the next big home automation thing coming out of India. Yes, yes. So the cleaned up version is actually publicly available as well. Okay. So once we did this data collection, the idea was that, okay, go deeper into NILM. So what exactly is NILM? It's non-intrusive load monitoring. So I've been telling all about that, can I give you disaggregated information and all that. I gave that sort of a small hint that putting appliance level energy meters is not very easy thing to do, because I may need to put lots of them, my failure points increase, managing them is very difficult. So can I be smarter about it? And that's where NILM comes into picture. The idea there is that if I have the whole home energy consumption from just 1 meter at the main incomer level, can I disaggregate this home consumption into individual appliance level consumption using machine learning, right? I mean, this is not, I mean, for those of you who have been in research, a corresponding analogy is a source separation problem, right? Which lots of people in audio and video community have looked into. And the intuition is that many of the major appliances that we are looking for, they have a unique electrical signature, right? Which if we can somehow map onto the overall aggregate consumption that I'm getting, then I should be able to disaggregate the main meter consumption into individual appliances, right? So over here, a fridge would have a compressor on and compressor off cycles, but when the compressor is on, the consumption is of, let's say, this magnitude. And AC would also have a compressor on and compressor off cycles, But when the compressor is on, the magnitude of consumption would be much more than a compressor of the refrigerator.
What's the temporal granularity of the overall measurements?
So, yeah, so the NILM research.
And if you got a switch on event, like the device got switched on, there's a step.
So it depends on again the granularity. So the NILM literature has looked into all the way from kilohertz, megahertz level, all the way to, let's say, 15-minute level. Yes, so the intuition, so the applications become different because when you do at a megahertz level, the idea is that you actually want to also analyze the switching frequency of the SMPS within the, which is within the power supply section of the appliance, because that SMPS will be able to differentiate for appliances which are varying power otherwise. So for example, a TV consumes energy depending on which pixels get illuminated at any point of time, right? Which even if you sample at few hertz, right, from a main meter level, it is very hard to disaggregate TV because its power consumption is largely varying. Similarly for appliances like laptop where your battery is getting charged, discharged and all that stuff. So appliances which are stateful like these, they are easy to do at a lower resolution. For example, 1 hertz or even lower, like every 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds, 30 seconds is good enough, right? But appliances which have variable power consumption, there it becomes a lot more challenging at lower frequency, and people have looked into higher frequency level. In fact, there's some interesting research where they say that by looking at the EMI, which is the electromagnetic induction coming from the power supply section, researchers showed that they can tell the genre of the movie you are watching on the TV, because a horror movie would have a lot more dark pixels than a romantic movie or a comedy movie and all that stuff, right? So, that's the level of information that, just as a small digression, my personal feeling is that if I sample enough for my energy and water consumption at the home, that will give a lot of insights about the way we live, which on the actions we do, which otherwise we do in a very background manner, right? But if we start monitoring them, what time we wake up, did we take bath today or not, how long did we watch TV today, what type of movies do we like and all that stuff. So there's a lot of information that I can collect by only looking at the energy and power, or energy and water consumption. If I am healthy or not could be translated into how many times I go to the bathroom and all that stuff. So essentially there's a lot of correlations that one may collect by just looking at the energy and water consumption within the home level. My sense is that the next big thing would be that what all personal aspects I can learn beyond. So people are talking about personalized aspects on whatever we search online and all that stuff. Beyond that, combining that online information with the way we live offline within the home, that's the reason probably Google bought Nest for several billions of dollars, because Google knows a lot about our online presence, but Google doesn't know much about what we do at home. And the idea is to know a lot more about us, what we do offline, and personalize search ads accordingly, right? So, that would likely be the next big wave where you start monitoring the offline activities, and therefore there's a lot of, in Europe specifically, there's a lot of regulations now coming on what resolution you can collect the data because of all these privacy aspects that are associated with the data. So just to look at the trivial threshold-based consumption, let's say if I only have a refrigerator and an AC, and they are simple two-state appliances, then if at any point of time I'm consuming 200 watts, I know my refrigerator is on and my AC is in the off state. And if I'm consuming 2000 watts, I know my AC is on, my refrigerator is off. At 2200, I know both. So, it's a simple combinatorial optimization looking at thresholds, assuming appliances are very stateful appliances, and all that stuff. Right?
Are you assuming a calibration stage, like when you go and install this, you also have the liberty of going inside the house and switching on each device, taking the signature?
So those approaches vary. So as I said, NILM literature is very rich. There are people who say that I would use training data where I have per appliance energy consumption, which is time stamped along with the main meter consumption also from a different home, and I will train from that home and apply it to this home. People may say that I will train from the same home and apply to the same home to see how good is the accuracy. So there are lots of flavors of that. I mean, I'm just giving you a flavor of what NILM really means, and so people from combinatorial optimization, then so FHMM is sort of considered very good technique for doing this disaggregation, much more complex than simple combinatorial optimization. But so then when we delve deeper into the NILM research, the first question we asked was, what should we work on next? And again, there was, on discussing with some senior people who were working in this space, they felt that it's a crowded space. There are already too many people working on these things. Everybody's running after increasing the accuracy by X percentage and all that stuff. So better to avoid this space, right? When we look deeper, we found that there is a big gap. That a lot of NILM research that was published, in fact, till that date, almost all, I would say, it was a rare thing to find out a paper which would compare their approach with someone else's approach, right? Everyone would say that I achieve 98% accuracy in disaggregating air conditioners, right? And they would explain all the theories and everything behind their approach. And the reason was that so people would, do overfitting, right? A lot of times. Of course, they would do cross validations and all that stuff, but none of the approaches existed in open source where I could just pick up an approach and say that, look, I will compare my approach with this approach, right? Further, people would work on their own data sets, right? So there were not too many data sets that were available which were in a similar format. So I as a researcher have to work extra hard to interface with more than one data set, and therefore I would avoid that. I would pick up one data set, work with it, and show my accuracy numbers, right? So some of these things, and people would come up with different metrics, right? So people would sometimes compare how accurately I can detect on state and off state with the discounting what is the power consumption in the on state, while someone may argue that no, power consumption in the on state is also important. So I would compare the overall energy consumption and not just the states and all that stuff. So different metrics, different data sets, not much comparison with existing approaches was a big gap that we saw. And we said that, okay, let's try to fill that gap, right? So we came up with this NILM toolkit where we picked up a few data sets which were publicly available. We converted them into common formats, and we gave a common framework for researchers to use and to compare their approaches with, right? So it started with the data interface thing. We observed that, of course, there are some basic functions that pretty much everyone applies. So sort of doing averaging over 15 minutes and all that stuff. So the toolkit gave some of those common statistical functions off the shelf. Then there was a lot of data cleanup that was required, and a pre-processing that is required to understand what are the gaps in the data, which data is for at what frequency and all that stuff. So some of these pre-processing steps were built into the toolkit. And then we trained and disaggregated using multiple. So we implemented an open source version of 3 of these approaches, which is Hart's algorithm, which was proposed way back in early 90s. An earlier version of that was proposed in 80s also, then an FHMM model also, and a combinatorial optimization model also. So, actually these numbers show that the community really felt that that was a gap. There were, in less than 2 years, lots of citations. Many NILM papers in BuildSys, which is considered one of the top conferences in this space, have used this toolkit to compare now their approach with other existing approaches. Many people have contributed back their algorithms also, right? People have contributed back their own data sets in the same format as we created for the other data sets, and there were a couple of awards also. So we said that, okay, we have serviced that gap, but let's look at the fundamental question. So everybody in the domain was trying to go after improving the accuracy, right? I am 80% accurate in disaggregating air conditioning. I am 99% accurate in disaggregating refrigerators, right? Let's assume the holy grail, right? Let's say there is an approach that can disaggregate with 100% accuracy, right? For all the appliances that I have at my home. Does it really, it goes back to your question, does it really result in savings? Because I'm missing out that portion. So I tell you your refrigerator consumes 40 units. What do you do with that information? Unless I tell you how can you take from 40 to 30, right? So all this looks very jazzy, very cool in the beginning, and like you said, there is a tapering effect after a certain months that, okay, I like my disaggregated thing. Based on the disaggregation, I may have taken some actions also, right? For example, the way it was mentioned in the Bijli talk that if I were to if someone tells me that my base load is very high, and I know, and I can myself look back and say that, okay, which are the appliances that are always on, then I can possibly say that, okay, I will switch off my Xbox and TV when I go to bed and all that stuff. But, can we take it to the next level? So the idea was that is X% accuracy, and this X could be 98, 99, 100, in disaggregation, is it just a vanity metric, right? So again, the term vanity metric comes from because I am being in this startup world and people talk a lot about Flipkart and Snapdeal using GMV as a vanity metric and not looking at profits and all that stuff, right? So are we as a researchers only going after, okay, my approach is theoretically very sound, I am able to achieve very high accuracy, but really there was no work that said that I was able to cut down energy cost by so much, because it involves a human element, people may not respond to that high accuracy and all that stuff. So that was another missing piece that we saw. So the idea was that, can I take it to that next level? So I have disaggregation. What can I do to convert from disaggregation to an actionable feedback? And given that I have that target, this has to be appliance specific, right? So I can, for every appliance, the action could be very different, right? And here I will talk about AC and refrigerator, because again, these were the two appliances which consume significant amount of power. So we looked at the fridge consumption over 24 hours, and this high consumption is coming because of the some deep freezing cycles or defrost cycles that refrigerator goes into, right? Now there is a different home that goes into, and otherwise the fridge is into normal state. And what happens in a fridge is that when I open the door, because there is a loss of cooling, the compressor remains on for a longer duration, right? Now there are two aspects. So we observed that from this overall, if I have the actual fridge energy consumption, there are two things that I can learn which are actionable. One is your fridge going into too many defrost cycles, and this will be denoted by high power consumption, which is happening too frequently compared to the way it's happening in other homes, right? Two, are the compressor cycles longer than what they are in other homes, which would mean that probably you are putting hot food inside the refrigerator, so the compressor has to work extra hard, or you are keeping the door open for longer than what you should be, and all that stuff, right? So these are very actionable things. The idea is to convert this whole power consumption into the next. So we looked at the high power state, we looked at the high power state would tell me whether my defrost cycles are longer than the average defrost cycles, and the length of the duty cycles would then tell me whether I am putting hot food inside the refrigerator, or I'm opening the fridge more often than otherwise.
So I have a question then. If it's only one or two appliances that are causing this heat spikes and where you can make your savings, then the other side of the coin is predictive analytics and predictive maintenance and stuff, right? So the fridge companies themselves, who are, I presume, domain experts, will be building better fridges with IoT sensors in the fridge to actually monitor all of this and provide you feedback and also do maintenance.
So I agree. I think that is the future. So my sense is that, I mean, this is all good. But if we talk about the real world use case, maybe, and this is already happening. So there are ACs that are smart ACs in terms of they are connected to the web, right? There are fridges. So people talk about microwaves connected to the web. You download a recipe, right? And it will change its cycles according to the requirements of the recipe, and you get a cake out of your microwave. So I think, I mean, people are talking about these smart appliances. There is a lot of benefit for the companies to do it themselves also, because then they can actually predict what are the different types of faults that come in, charge some maintenance fee and all that stuff. So my sense is putting these devices within, some devices within the appliance will likely benefit. There will be, and if I have those devices within the appliance, then I can do a lot more by collecting the main meter information also. But till the time we reach there, what all can we do by just using the meter level information? And I agree that the idea of moving is from disaggregation to predictive analysis, or to analyze from the actionable feedback perspective, rather than just saying that how accurate I am in terms of disaggregation.
Just to support you, I mean, I think you're completely right. I, like many people, would like to save energy. I have no idea why my electricity bills are so high. We don't use AC. I would absolutely love to have a picture that said hot water is this, your fridge is this, your fans are this, because then you would know what to target.
Right.
Because you're not going to make your whole life really uncomfortable, but you might be willing to make part of your life a little bit less comfortable if you could save some good amounts of energy.
Right.
And by having a picture, if you could give everybody a picture of their household consumption, then I reckon like a big chunk of people would want to act on that,
Right.
even if not everybody did.
Right, right.
So for me, I mean, yeah, the sooner we have this, the better.
I agree. And actually, I mean, what you're talking about is where people are also moving there. So people have also started talking about that, look, if the fridge has to do a defrost cycle once in 24 hours, right? Can I tell the fridge when to do that defrost cycle? And I look at the demand, I look at the supply curve, and I say that when my demand is lesser than compared to my supply, I will push all my fridges in the neighborhood to go into defrost cycle, right? So that's an intelligent way. At the utility level also, you give me the control of when your fridge goes. I will guarantee you your fridge goes into one defrost cycles every 24 hours. But I will decide when that event happens, right? So people are moving in that direction. When devices become smarter, then actually the applications on top of it will become even smarter, right? So, I mean, that's the overall idea, right? That make this world a smarter place to live in. So with this approach of actionable feedback, we took a data set where there were 97 fridges and 58 air conditionings across different homes. And we were able to say that 17 out of 95 homes could be given a feedback on excess defrost savings by up to 25% of their fridge energy consumption, right? Similarly, 13 out of 95 homes could have been given. So this data set, by the way, had appliance level consumption also and meter level. So we were able to validate by just using the meter data that how much we were able to, but we used the disaggregated information from the meter data. So we didn't use the appliance level data. So the idea was that with disaggregated data, what sort of actionable feedback that I can give. And the interesting part was that other approaches like combinatorial optimization or FHMM or Hart's algorithm, they really performed very badly on, if I use this as a metric, that can you really give actionable feedback. forget, but these, I mean, just to compare that whether these are the best approaches or not, I mean, there are some of these papers that have worked in NILM space, and these are the approaches which are one of the good approaches which are given good accuracy numbers otherwise. So they are otherwise good in terms of achieving high disaggregation accuracy, but when the same approaches were applied to convert disaggregation into actionable feedback, they were not able to do it because they were not using those features, right? So if the idea, I mean, the point I'm trying to put in is that depending on the features that we use, we may be achieving a different metric, and I mean, our whole point was that it is okay to have overall disaggregation accuracy of 70%, but if I can result, if that 70% can result in 2% energy reduction, I would rather go for that 70% than a 98%, where I don't know how to get to that 2% reduction.
I wonder if there's another dimension here, which is the level of instrumentation you're willing to do.
Yes.
Like for example, I think the work that Shwetak Patel did, which I think one of these wireless routing companies required.
Right. So that was on high frequency data only.
Right.
EMI.
But they were looking at EMI.
Right,
so
right.
Perhaps, so that's, you're not looking at that.
No. We are looking at smart meter data only.
So is there a reason that is not practical to do? Because I think there's some wireless routing company bought them, so presumably.
Yeah, but I mean, that again happened. So I think Linksys or Belkin bought them, right? So, and that was probably like 4 years ago. We still don't see a commercial product out of it. So, I mean, one of my PhD students actually is working in EMI space, and I think that EMI, I mean, again, it's one of those things which are pretty cool for one-off things. The moment you try to scale it up, because the volume of data is so large, and the way to collect that data is also very tricky, because what happens in the case of high frequency EMI data is that two appliances which are in close proximity, they start interfering with each other. So the otherwise, when the signal that you would, the high frequency signal that you would see when only one appliance is on, versus when you see the signal at two appliances, it's not a sum addition because of destructive and constructive interference. And the worst part is that constructive and destructive interference depends on how close or far those appliances are. Now you suddenly start needing all that information of which appliance is where, what type of electrical wiring has been done in the home to actually achieve very high levels of accuracy with EMI data. And there are lots. So 2 years ago, we had a paper in BuildSys where we showed that why EMI data cannot be used for disaggregation. I mean, citing all these challenges and all that stuff. So then this year we said that, okay, I'm doing something to convert disaggregation into actionable feedback. But then, I mean, I started off with a vision, right? That the vision was that buildings consume roughly 40% of the overall world's energy consumption, and I want to make a dent at that scale, right? But my approaches are really very complex, right? And these complex approaches are very hard to scale. If I were to talk about 100 million homes or 1 billion homes across the world, right? So that's when this year we started thinking that let's look at this 100 million building energy breakdown challenge, right? So previous approaches are hard to scale because you require different types of instrumentation at different levels, at different resolutions. The data collection is very tricky. So what can we do to give energy breakdown to, let's say, 100 million homes, right? Now, if we start with this number, of course, there are no smart meters. 100 million homes don't exist with smart meters, right? So either I wait for smart meters to be deployed, or I look into what can I do without smart meters, right? And that's where we started. So of course, so now the question is, what can I do without smart meters? So therefore, I cannot go to the other end of the spectrum, where I need real-time data, I need high-resolution data. So that's thrown out, right? Because I don't have that data. So can I do something here? And again, go back to the initial video of O-Power. if I have only monthly energy consumption data, simple thing I can do is compare your energy with your neighbors, right? And that's a thing I can scale to 100 million homes as of today, because I mean even billion homes, any home that I'm billing, I can scale that approach to all the homes.
Just a related question. Did you, in your research or with your startup, see variation between different brands of ACs or different
Yes,
refrigerators?
yes.
So
So to a level that there, I mean, we did some control experiments to see that sometimes 3-star ACs are worse than 2-star ACs, depending on the brand.
so by making this information somehow, I don't know, available or
See,
using this,
part of that information is already there, right? That there is a star rating for different appliances, right? So, but there is an associated cost, right? So a 5-star AC, for example, costs roughly about 8 to 10,000 rupees more than a 2-star AC. Now, they claim, and their claims are not very off, that you will recover back in 2.5 years. Sometimes they claim less than 1 year, which is not correct. So roughly 2.5 years is when you will recover back in terms of your operational savings. But then people really have a very small vision in terms of when they take actions, right? So if I'm able to save 8,000 today, I'm willing to spend on yearly basis 5,000 extra, right? So I mean, for those who care about that long-term thing, they do take actions. So I think some of that information already exists in terms of star ratings. Government is doing its bit. There is Bureau of Energy Efficiency, BEE, that gives all these star ratings. Unfortunately, the way these star ratings are decided in the Indian context is also not right. They have been adopted from star ratings in the Australian context, and we don't do a lot of control experiments specific to the Indian environment to then vary those thresholds based on which these star ratings are decided. So we have broadly adopted what Australian thresholds were for coming up with star ratings in different appliance categories. So there is some improvements that are possible on that front, but I think both of these are sort of parallel things, right? So if you have, because once you have bought a 2-star AC, you will not replace it, because replacing is a much more expensive thing, right? You may not even buy, if you have to make a decision at the time of buying, you may not even buy a 5-star AC. But once you have bought a 2-star AC, the question then is how can I make that 2-star AC more efficient, right? So we narrowed down the focus to say that, look, I am focusing on this aspect, that can I give daily, weekly, sort of monthly feedback, can I enhance the billing, and do more than, for example, just comparing with neighbors, right? So key intuition is that different homes have different other meta information that is available. For example, number of occupants in the home or the size of the home, right? And largely if you look at it, if you think of it, the energy consumption would get dictated by one or more of these meta information. So for example, depending on number of occupants, if the 2 washing machines are similar, we can likely say that the monthly energy consumption of washing machines from the 2 homes will be very similar, right? Depending on the area that you need to cool, you can likely say that the energy consumption of the 2 homes will be similar, right? So the key thing there was, so we came up with this approach which we call Gemelo, which is a word for twin. So the idea here was that for the home that I want to disaggregate for, where I don't have a smart meter, can I find similar homes and use those similar homes to give disaggregated information to this home, right? So if that's possible, then I can create a small set of homes, and from that small set of homes, I can find out similar homes in a very large set and give disaggregation to that very large set. So that's the high level intuition.
How are you getting the information about the number of occupants?
So, I mean, there are other data sets. For example, if you look at your electricity bill, it would say that, I mean, what category of load you have, so 2 kilowatts and all that stuff, right? Then there are, for example, the ration card department would have some information about number of occupants in your home. So the idea is that that information at scale is somewhere available. If that information is given access, if I get access to that information, for which I don't need to put any technology. I mean, maybe at best what I need to do is to interface with that database and pull all that information at scale. So the high level overview is for so I agree, although, I mean, for example, the type of data that we are talking about, number of occupants in the home, I think there are national surveys and all those things. At least in the US context, so I'm not very confident about how easily we can do it in the Indian context, but at least in the US context, for example, there are lots of property websites that would have information about square footage of your area, exact square footage of your area. And these are sort of tech websites from which pulling that information will not be very difficult. So at least in the US context, getting the number of occupants, area of the home and all that stuff is not very tricky. It could be tricky in the Indian context, I don't know. We haven't yet done it in the Indian context.
And what percentage of homes already have smart meters
in the US, I think it's roughly about 15%. Right. So the primary application of smart metering across the world is AMR, automated meter reading, which is used for billing purposes and for purposes where you want to do a differentiated billing at different times of the day. Right? Depending on your supply, you want to change the pricing of the electricity that you are providing. That's the key value that utilities derive out of smart meter data. And that's why actually the holy grail resolution, so is 15 minutes. So that's a fairly standard thing again across the world, that utilities typically, even if they have installed smart meters, they would collect data at a 15-minute resolution. And pretty much all of the research literature in NILM just fails at that resolution, because everybody works at seconds resolution from the smart meter data, which in real world at scale that data actually doesn't exist, even with whatever deployments we have of smart meters across the world. So the intuition here is that if I have small set of homes where I put in these appliance level meters also, right, then these become my training homes, right? And from these homes, can I find similar homes in my test data set where I don't have smart meters, but I have access to other meta information, monthly consumption, number of occupants, area of the home and all that stuff. And if I pick up one of these homes, so let's say I pick one home and I'm interested in 3 appliances, fridge, AC and washing machine. So I look at, and I do it appliance by appliance level. I pick up one appliance and I find out 2 homes which are very similar in terms of the feature sets that I'm using, right, which are easy to collect for large 100 million homes, right? And I find out that these 2 homes are very similar, and I do I take their fridge consumption and I do a simple averaging to find out, let's say, what is the monthly energy consumption of fridge for this home, right? Very simple thing, very easy to scale. Of course, there are complexities around how do you find similar homes, and can you go beyond, so can you do weighted average or do you do simple average? So some of those things would then come into play, right? And I do the same thing then for AC also. For AC, maybe the similar homes are different homes because the parameters that I use for matching are different, and I do again a simple averaging, and same way I do it for washing machine. So that way I get, for a home where I don't have a smart meter, I get disaggregated information in terms of how much each appliance would have consumed, right?
So when you match, you keep the geography the same?
So I'll come to that. So the features that we use and is area, number of occupants, number of rooms, aggregated home energy consumption, at different months, because there is a weather information embedded within each month. So therefore, a monthly energy consumption is useful. And then from these, we derive few statistical features like variance, range, percentiles, min to max ratio, skew, kurtosis, and all that stuff. So the first thing we do is, depending on the features that we decide for each appliance, we do a matching. So first thing is feature selection. Depending on feature selection, we do a matching. And let's say in this case, these two homes are, so we find the top k homes in this, if let's say k is 2, these are the two homes, and from those two homes, I get the refrigerator energy consumption, right? So k is a metric that I need to look at, that how many similar homes should I look at, whether they should be in the same region or not, and all that stuff, right? So again, we took a data set where there were 57 homes, and this data was available for 12 months. So we wanted to pick a data set where we could validate also, right? And therefore, I couldn't just work with any data where all those features are available. So this is a data set where we have those features also, and the per appliance energy consumption also, so that I could validate whether my approach, how good is my approach, right? So of these 57 homes, the air conditioning individual AC level meters were in 31 homes, for fridge 21, and so on and so forth, right? And just to compare how good is my approach, I should compare it with few other things. So we took more complex, given that I have 15-minute resolution data from each of these homes, I picked up couple of disaggregation algorithms, which is FHMM, and we picked up one algorithm from NIPS from 2015. And we took them as a baseline. Along with what happens is, US government every 5 years or so does a very extensive survey of a selected homes in different states. And they do some complex statistical analysis on top of it to then come up with regional averages of, let's say in this region, the average AC consumption per home is so many units, right? So that's a third metric we compare with. Okay, so regional average is missing here, but the idea here was that now this FHMM and LBM are using 15-minute data, while our approach is not using any smart meter data. We are only using those features which can be easily extended, and we were still able to achieve for different, for HVAC and fridge and all those appliances. So for many of these appliances, we are able to achieve better accuracy than even the state-of-the-art NILM algorithms that also require smart metering deployment. The next question is how good, so even when we took LBM approach and shifted from 15-minute to 2-minute data, even then our accuracies across the homes was better than the LBM approach with 2 minutes as well. So that sort of gave us a confidence that yes, this thing can scale, but there are really, okay, and so few questions that we need to answer is, do we really need small number of sub-meters? So I'm assuming that I have small number of homes that are already sub-metered at the appliance level, right? So is that number going to be in thousands, hundreds of thousands, or few hundred? That's a question we need to answer, right? So when we looked at the overall accuracy of our approach as we increase the number of test homes, the accuracy improves, of course, but it doesn't improve drastically. So even with small number of homes that have sub-metered data, I am able to achieve reasonable accuracy, which is better than state-of-the-art disaggregation algorithms. But is it still scalable? So if we were to being realistic, there are two things that we observed. If I really am honest about scaling it to 100 million homes, then one, do I need to have these test homes across regions which are of different weather conditions, right? Or can I use these test homes from one region with a very different weather condition for getting disaggregation? So for example, can I use homes from Austin to disaggregate, or homes from New York to disaggregate for homes in Los Angeles with two very different weather conditions, right? Or for that matter, in Indian context, can I use homes from Delhi to disaggregate for Bangalore, right, or vice versa. The other thing is that these small set of homes that we talk of which have this disaggregated information, they will not have all the features at all the time. So being realistic, some sensors will fail, sometimes my network communication will fail. So I will have some data at some time, some data at different time. So my feature sets which I am using to exploit the similarity will also likely not be available across all the homes, right? So these are, if I am honest about my 100 million challenge, I should try to address these two things. So again, a next step, which is a very recent step, is to address these challenges, and we are still working on these, but there are two key intuitions that I'll talk about, and with that I'll finish the presentation, that allow us to take it to the next level. So if you look at the energy profile across different regions, so US, Wisconsin, Texas, of course, like I said, the energy profiles are different.
Just one question about your previous result. I suppose if you did this, applied this technique on a single home, that is, you used that same home as the twin of itself. Look at alternate days or something, right? You take submeter data from Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then try to predict for Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. How will it go? I mean, in some sense, that would establish a limit.
A limit, yeah. So we didn't do that, but that's an interesting thing to sort of look at. So what we did was, can I transform? So I understand that there are different appliances. So a home in New York would consume a lot of heating in winter months compared to a home in Los Angeles. So can I account for, let's say, the weather conditions by normalizing the data by some weather, by either degree days or by their overall energy. So by certain aspects, if I become intelligent in terms of how do I normalize from one region to another to account for variation in weather conditions, then I may solve that problem of requiring test data in all different types of regions. Now we tried a few different types of weather normalizations, and the other aspect, like I said, there are different features. So for example, if you look at these 628 homes, and if you look at different features, so the monthly energy consumption and the area and the rooms and the occupants, so not all homes have all different types of features, right? So what we then did was that I still have this objective that I want to find one or more homes which are similar to this home, considering that these test homes may come from a different region and may have different set of features also. So let's say these are 4 target homes, T1, T2, T3, T4, and let's assume that, okay, home H has monthly energy consumption from Jan to September, but it's missing monthly energy from, let's say, October, November, December. T1 has all 12 months, T4 has from March till December. For home 1, I have for all 3 homes, I have number of occupant information. For only H and T1, I have the square footage information. I don't have it for T4. So what we do is we look at which information is overlapping across all of these homes, right? So what I do is, from the test homes, I pick up 2 of these homes, say T1 and T4, and then I look at which information is overlapping across both of these homes, and based on that information, I do a rank ordering, that T1 is closer to T4, right? Then I pick up another set of 2 homes and I do again a rank ordering. So I pick up all the NC2 set of homes, I do an individual rank ordering of all those homes, and from that individual rank ordering, I try to create a global rank ordering, which becomes a very hard, NP hard problem to solve, but then I say that I come up with a global ordering which satisfies majority of the constraints, right? So which can be heuristically done. So once I have this global ordering, then I have address for both the features, right? So I use normalization to go across regions, and because of missing feature information, I use this individual rank ordering and create a global rank ordering, and then I follow the same procedure that I have this global rank ordering, I do it for each appliance separately, and I do average or weighted average and all that stuff. So we are still working on the results. So I haven't put in the results, but the same approach we applied for, there is a University of Chicago is doing a Urban Labs Innovation Challenge in Delhi in partnership with Delhi government, where they are saying they crowdsource ideas for environment and energy from public, and they said that up to 3 of those ideas will be funded by up to about 2 crores to implement for better environment and energy in Delhi in collaboration with the government of Delhi. And of the 250 proposals that were submitted, they have selected 9 for the final round, and this proposal around this approach for scaling disaggregation for all the homes in Delhi has been selected as one of the 9 approaches. So, I mean, just to put an end to, I mean, give a final perspective, so we are talking about what can we do without smart meters, right? But a lot of countries are going ahead for deploying smart meters. So what is the next stage beyond smart meters? So I was actually recently been involved in a consultation meeting with Power Ministry in central government, and even Government of India has signed a protocol at the global level which mandates India to deploy some few millions of smart meters by 2020. So given the distressed state of all the utilities in the Indian context, government is trying to see how can I deploy but not incur the cost. So government is coming up with this concept of go from smart meter to smart hub. So what if my meter doesn't do just energy consumption but does things on top of it, right? So maybe it provides wireless connection also, Wi-Fi connectivity within the home, or maybe it provides dish, so TV channels within the home. So can I do one, and if I create one such hub, then other companies might be willing to, so my dish TV company is willing to put all the hardware for free because they charge me a monthly fee. My network service provider is willing to put the router for free because they charge me a monthly fee. So the idea they are looking at it is, can I piggyback on those hardware that anyway gets deployed and do energy profiling of the homes and add on some small hardware to the smart home. So the idea is to move from smart meter to smart hub, and that's largely what we are trying to do at Zenetics for not the residential part but retail, so smart retail, so banks, ATMs, restaurant chains, financial institutions, so Bharti AXA Life Insurance would have small offices and all that stuff. So tomorrow I'll talk largely about how Zenetics as a startup evolved from what we were doing in the early days to what we are doing now, but largely the idea is to create this sort of a smart hub type of an environment where we not just do energy but move a retail or an ATM from a regular ATM to a smart ATM kind of stuff. So just to summarize the key takeaways, in terms of IoT, the devices are becoming easier to put together. So you guys are using Raspberry Pi sensors to put together an IoT system in place, and you can see that these devices are becoming easier than ever before, but scaling them is still a very big challenge. With lots of these devices which are easy to deploy, it's now becoming easier and easier to get lots of data, and there are lots of hidden treasures in this data, especially if you start combining the data. So our intuition of combining, let's say, information coming from other data sets with energy information to give disaggregation to large number of homes is largely built on this thing that can I do intermixing of different data sets to come up with things which are otherwise not possible by information coming from one or the other data set individually. And by the way, with this lots of information data coming in, there is also a new problem that has emerged to segregate the good data or useful data from all the data, right? So which is a new problem in itself. And I would recommend for all of you for those of you early into your PhD research, to do a validated learning driven research, right? So pick up a hypothesis which is quick to implement, validate that hypothesis quickly, so you know, and specifically if you're working in ubiquitous systems, in IoT systems where human element is involved. So pick up your hypothesis. So for example, in this case, the hypothesis is that if I give disaggregated information, people will reduce on their energy consumption. So for that, I don't really need to build the best state-of-the-art disaggregation system. Maybe I just put in energy level meters, appliance level meters. I start giving disaggregated information to 5 homes, 10 homes, and I see whether they reduce on their consumption. So if that hypothesis is validated, then dig down deeper into what are the real research challenges, where you can then go deeper, which contributes towards your PhD research and sort of validate your early hypothesis, which eventually leads to a high scale impact at the global or the social level. So with that, I'll just finish my presentation. And apologies for taking more time and stopping you from lunch.
Your analysis is on a cyclic load like ACs, where there is this signal like when you see the power versus temporal information, the AC have this high and low and stuff. So is your analysis of aggregation, disaggregation still apply on simple load, but there will be no AC and this stuff?
So by the way, the approach like Gemello and Wistrid that we were talking about towards the end, we don't look at those things, right? We only look at the monthly information. So whether AC would have been a cyclic load or a non-cyclic load, constant load, it wouldn't matter for those approaches. But for disaggregation approaches, largely when I say it goes back to the comment that I made earlier also, that if the appliances are stateful and if in each of these states the energy consumption is not varying too much, then any disaggregation approach would be easier. It will be easier for that approach to disaggregate than for appliances which are not stateful and with varying power consumption. It is largely true for all disaggregation approaches.
Another question, sir. Sir, in industries, when they consume electric power, so government have made this, like if you maintain a power factor of 1, they will give incentives. Yeah. So is there anything like any parameter or like kind of stuff applied in the home case, like domestic case?
So domestic power factor doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So industries pay for kVAH, and that is why power factor comes into picture. Domestic you pay for kWh, and therefore doesn't matter what power factor you run your appliances at. But largely the home appliances don't make power factor very bad. So yeah, of course if there's a government incentive, then energy efficiency gets pushed a lot. So for example, recently in Delhi, Tata Power launched a scheme where they said that if you want to replace your old AC with a new 5-star AC, they will give 10,000 rupee discount from their side. So of course, if there are financial incentives coming from some government schemes, that would push energy efficient behavior. But like I was commenting to other feedback, that's sort of a parallel thread to what we are trying to achieve, to push people for energy efficient behavior.
Hi, my question is, when we are disaggregating all the values for a smart home with smart meters, homes with smart meters, and extend it to homes without such stuff, wouldn't it again entirely depend on the lifestyle of the different homes?
It would, which is why you see these numbers are not excellent. So, I mean, if I look at the accuracies, these accuracies are not excellent. I mean, I'm talking about less than 80% accuracy, and in some cases this goes as low as 30-35% accuracy. So there are reasons because of which there will be deviations, right? So I'm not saying that, but I mean, you also have to see that what is the input information that I'm taking, right? It is a very low resolution information, and I'm just comparing it with state of the art approaches which take a lot more information but of a different context. Right? So these approaches are not taking the feature sets that I am using, but they are using the smart meter data. So I'm not saying this is the 100 million home challenge. So I'm just trying to push forward that the community should look into this 100 million disaggregation challenge. We are putting forward one approach which seems to work reasonably well for AC and fridge, but for many other appliances it doesn't work very well. So maybe there's some other approach out there which is way better than our approach. But that's the direction we need to look at as a disaggregation community.
Because we might make him, he might take unnecessary decisions because of this disaggregation results from other
So I agree
places.
that before we scale it to 100 million homes, we should improve these numbers, right? We recently started on this thread. We are looking into what are the constraints, what other features can we use which are easy to collect to further improve these numbers. Before, I agree largely that unless I have, let's say, 80%, at least 80% confidence in giving that information to the user, I should not be giving false information to the user.
20 years ago, around 20 years ago, we hardly had any mobile devices. So today it's outburst of so many mobile devices. So is there any real concern on the kind of charging that takes place on a continuous basis? Even every person has 2 mobiles today. So is it a concern or it's not to be worried at this stage?
No, so I don't think I'm competent enough to answer that. My personal view is that, we will always, so we went from a non-industrialized world to an industrialized world, right? When industry started consuming a lot of power. Then we started, in 80s we added personal computers and televisions, which have now become just a common thread. So I think that's how humanity will likely evolve. So the energy stress will keep on increasing, right? That our hunger to consume more will not stop, because that's what the development is related to, right? Is largely associated. So any new development we do will have an energy impact, right? I think we need to be smart in terms of reducing that impact to the best possible extent, and also go to renewable to push to reduce the overall impact on the environment side. I think the consumption stress, I don't see that as reducing, and 3 devices, 5 devices, it will increase that stress.
Hello, sir. The system you are proposing is kind of like a system which gives us information and we can react to how to save power. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on creating a system which can react all by itself, depending upon some predetermined setting.
So that's an ideal thing, right? And that's what actually, if you know of a smart thermostat called Nest and other smart thermostat, that's what they do. So in an ideal world, the system automatically understands your behavior and adapts as per your behavior, right? I think that would be a vision which we should work towards, right? Yes, if I can react automatically, it would be ideal. But at the initial stages, if I can just give information, because I don't know, so some people may be willing. So like she was saying that I'm willing to compromise a little bit to save my cost, but maybe you are not willing to compromise at all, and you are saying that I am willing to go higher on the cost, but I don't compromise on my comfort level. So understanding that behavior is very challenging in the automated sense. Until that time, at least we can ask people to do it manually and observe what they do, and eventually then train the system to do those actions in an automated manner based on what they prefer, right? So that may be the way forward.